Alrighty. Hey, everybody. Welcome to wasmCloud Wednesday for Wednesday, July 9th. Today, we are going to be doing our quarter 3 roadmap planning. So it'll be the just general wasmCloud roadmap over July, August, and September. As a reminder for everybody that this meeting is totally open. Anybody's welcome to come and share their perspective on wasmCloud. We also open up a GitHub discussion ahead of time so that we can talk about specific issues and find the things that the community basically votes on to put on the roadmap. And so we'll go through that. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, we actually have a new community member who's going to be joining us. Maybe not new to the community, but first time on the call. Alex, would you like to do a quick introduction, like how you found wasmCloud, what you do? I guess you're welcome to say anything, but floor is yours.
Yeah, everyone, hi. My name is Alex Jones. I'm actually a technical trainer with the Linux Foundation Education. So I work on WebAssembly, cybersecurity, and other type of content for the Linux Foundation to help educate learners on open source technology. I found out about Wasm Cloud when I was learning about WebAssembly while I was an intern for the Linux Foundation. So I've known it for a couple of years now. And the reason why I wanted to come on this call is to learn more about the community and be able to interview Brooks and anyone else who's interested in basically providing information about Wasm Cloud so that other people can see the project, learn more about it, and be interested and hopefully either join the project or use it in their own production projects. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Alex, for being here. If anybody has, wants to share their perspective, talk about Wasm Cloud, a lot of the folks who are on this call right now are either maintainers or really longtime community members. But for anybody who's interested, if you go into the Wasm Cloud Slack, I think Alex posted something a little bit ago, just like, hey, who wants to share perspective? So definitely do that. But great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. This will be okay. Now that we did that, the rest of the meeting will pretty much be for the roadmap planning. So if folks have things that they wanted to bring up for the Wasm Cloud roadmap for Q3, now's a good time to kind of queue that up in your head or start pinging links in the chat so that we can start queuing that up for the for discussion. That is the main thing that we want to talk about today. And as is tradition, I'd love to do just a quick retrospective on the last roadmap, see how we did, see where we got to, and just kind of generally reflect on the goals of the roadmap. So from the last, well, that's a retrospective for the last retrospective. For Q3, we tried a new separation of categories on the Wasm Cloud roadmap. So instead of doing it by a particular feature, bug, documentation, we organized all tickets into research, development, or good first issue. So this separation really tried to make the roadmap a little bit more approachable so that people who have contributed before know they can come and take development. Um, Drew, people can take development items. If they're the first time contributor just looking to make a dent in the project, good first issue is a great high level place for that to happen. And research are the ones that are just a little bit more in depth. They require project perspective and history. So that's usually better taken by a maintainer or somebody who's leading out a specific project. So I think that that was a great success in the Q2 roadmap. I'll go back to the board to talk about the issues that have come across. But well, we'll talk about that in just a moment. As far as the things that we talked about as the big pieces of work, we've made great progress on a lot of these. Wash plugins, of course, is something that exists in Wash today. You can write WebAssembly component plugins to make subcommands for Wash. Something that I've been working on over the past few weeks as we got to the end of the roadmap, is essentially Wash reimagined as a plugin model first. Now, I haven't shared any of that work in the community call yet. Excuse me, but I hope to do so next week, and I just want to say that I'm really excited about how all that's going. In the Wash Dev dashboard and output story, we actually had a community member who's taken up the issue of providing the wasmCloud dashboard with Wash Dev, which has been going great. We've also seen some good brainstorming around an OTel dashboard for debugging applications. Probably more on that later. Aligning Wash with the XTG directory specification went great. We had a community member and contributor. Sorry, your contributor name's like 5 letters and F4Z something something, but you're awesome and actually implemented this in Wash, so this is complete. And we've done a lot of research into the strategy for Wash Dev, and that also feeds into like a pluginified Wash. So at a high level, we've done great work towards our roadmap to actually come in and take a look at the individual items on the roadmap. Can I not show the details? I'll figure that out later. It actually coming to the roadmap will go from the top up. Two things are still in the essentially ready for work phase, which I think we can essentially just roll over to the quarter 3 roadmap. They're still very much warranted. Deep design exploration of HTTP. This was one of the biggest items that came from the last roadmap. And I wouldn't say that we've done no work towards this. We've certainly thought about the capability provider, the status of the HTTP interface. Masood has actually implemented, our OSS fellow has implemented the built-in HTTP client provider and done some reorganization of crates there. But it is still worth a more deep design exploration of this. And unfortunately, it's somewhat of a broad subject, but I still think that this will be well worth it. And especially with WASI P3 coming down the pipe, I think that this is still well worth doing. So I would propose that we roll this over to the quarter 3 roadmap, as well as it's interesting. This one, the provider key value nats appears to hang. Seems to be maybe a little hard to reproduce. But I think it's still taking a look. Well, it's still worth taking a look into this. I would actually propose that this may be a good first issue for somebody to take on the next roadmap because it's basically run the component, see if you find the issue, see if you see the issue, and then dig into it from there. So the two that we didn't start, I don't feel too bad about. In terms of what we have, and anybody, please feel free to stop me at any time. I'm just trying to rapid fire go through the roadmap so we can get on to Q3 discussion. Um, as far as pluginifying Wash and the host configuration file, I've actually been working on both of these a little bit just to try and come up with the right abstraction for the right level of detail for the host config file, and for Wash with a more plugin component perspective. Would love to share maybe a little bit more of that next week, just so that we don't bog down this discussion too much. But I will say that we've been working on it, just trying to experiment first before trying to just like propose a solution and get it out there. And then my favorite thing from this roadmap, the thing that makes me want to carry this format forward, is that on this good first issue list, the allow latest not taking effect, I went ahead and knocked out at some point. I just need to merge my PR eventually, TM, and HTTP JSONify not returning the given body. I found, I think, a simple fix for. Other than those two, every other item in this category was actually completed by a community member or a contributor or a maintainer. And I think that well, maintainer or whatever. But so many of these were taken by new contributors like Rabel, who's come in and jumped and solved a couple issues, which has been awesome. Under policy decisions being cached by the host, there is another community member who added a draft and then I think got blocked on CI or something. So still working on that. Um, Updating the custom capability provider. Hey, this is the person who did the XTG directory spec. Opened up a pull request to resolve this one. Another member, Kaif, sorry, opened up something for the wash dev, having the washboard, and so on and so on. So huge hats off to all the contributors who have kind of come in. I would love to hear from you if you found the issue through the roadmap or if you just found it by searching for good first issue. But I think that this category is awesome. We should just kind of roll forward some of these issues that are in progress, so we make sure that we keep an eye on them. But it's a great place for us to basically pull in issues at any time. So I would love to keep highlighting the issues on the Good First Issue roadmap page, essentially every week in the wasmCloud community call. Just pick the next one down the list, highlight it as an issue of the week, and then move on from there. I think we've got great gains from that. Other than that, it just leaves completed, which I know we've essentially punted on some of the work for workload identity in wasmCloud. We do have an implementation of the identity interface, and you can use workload identity to essentially join Nats like to get credentials, but we are leaving it in that state for now so we can keep testing. As mentioned, a community contributor came in and replaced the .wash directory with XDG base directory spec, which is awesome. Eric added documentation, I think, with Roman. Ooh, yeah. With the help of Roman for handling wRPC error, the special error format, which you can use in your custom WIT interfaces now and actually handle transport errors with wRPC, which is awesome. And then community members came in for showing updates for Washbottom Nats and allowing external access of host ID for the host process. So, hey, y'all, so many of the issues on the Q2 roadmap were completed by community members, contributors, and that to say it without getting too warm and fuzzy, it warms my heart. I love to see it. Does anybody have any thoughts, questions, concerns that they'd like to bring up from the Q2 roadmap before we move on to talking Q3? Yeah, hey, I think that there were definitely things that are not on this roadmap that are well worth shouting out. I would love to, Lucas threw this in the chat, but really hats off to OSS Fellow for contributing the Nats Blob Store capability provider. It's really awesome to see more and more capability implementations on Nats. Like with the current status quo where you're basically running wasmCloud alongside a NATS set of infrastructure, it's awesome to be able to have a message bus, a persistent key value store, now a blob store, like a distributed object store, all in the same like passing or all using the same infrastructure. So basically you run Nats, you run wasmCloud, you have like all these cloud capabilities that are distributed all over the place. You just got to configure Nats. And really, yeah, we basically have implemented most of the WASI Cloud world wait, not most, all of it, for real. Because config is also stored in Nats Jetstream. So look at that. Good job, Nats and wasmCloud. You all are your friends. So it's really just awesome for folks. I think there's plenty more thoughts to share about Nats, but I figure I will. It's worth mentioning that over the last quarter we had a little bit of a scare to think about, like what does the wasmCloud, what does the future of wasmCloud look like in terms of Nats? And I think we're pretty happy to have settled on no changes necessary there, right? The wasmCloud and Nats are like going to work better together in the CNCF space. And while I think it would be really good, thinking forward to quarter three, to think about ways that we can make our Wasm Cloud host a little bit simpler. I still see tons of integration and power for plugging in with NATs, especially for our distributed edge, distributed cloud story. Just there really is no there really is no project that can replace it wholesale. Other than that, something that I think we took off of this roadmap just because it's, it, it it's kind of hard to keep track of constantly, but does take a lot of Wasm Cloud maintainer time, is the development of WASI P3. So, and I'm not saying at all, by the way, that this is only Wasm Cloud. Wasm Cloud is only a small part, a small but critical part of development of WASI P3. So, our very own Bailey Hayes is working all the time over on the Bytecode Alliance side to steward the standards. Victor, who is a Wasm Cloud maintainer all over the place, has been spending a ton of time on the JavaScript component tooling and JavaScript or Node.js runtime side of the component implementation. So thank you, Victor, for spending a lot of your time and effort there. And Roman, another of our Wasm Cloud maintainer, creator of wRPC, he has been spending a lot of his time actually implementing WASI P3 in Wasm time, fixing bugs, testing it out, implementing component model async, and again, these folks are not, oh, hey, thanks, Lucas. That's a good one. These folks are not the only ones doing it, but they are certainly spending good time and putting forth good work. So thank you all for your work there. And I'm sure, I mean, Colin, you're here on the call, and I think you're involved in WASI more tightly than I am too. So thank you for your service.
Yeah, not so much these days, but yeah, I look forward to doing more
Yeah.
again.
So just as it was a big part of our quarter two roadmap, WASI 0.3 will be a big part of the quarter three roadmap as well. I didn't capture it on any specific tickets on the Wasm Cloud side yet because there's, I don't think we're really in a spot right now to integrate anything. But as just general background context, we're looking forward to the next iteration of WASI 0.3. Previews are expected sometime in August, and this refactors some of the 0.2 interfaces like HTTP and I/O, and it adds native async support to the component model, which is a huge piece of work. And sorry, I don't know all the people to shout out, but thanks everybody on the Bytecode Alliance side for contributing here. Okay, so I think that is the last bit. Oh, hey, Bailey came in just in time. I think that's the last bit to talk about from the quarter two roadmap, but I'd like to move on to talk about quarter three. So the only things that are present on this board right now essentially came in this morning. Whether they were issues that existed already or we created them wholesale. But last week in the call, I did share a blog that I had been working on. So a couple weeks ago, published a year of Wasm Cloud 1.0, which is an awesome milestone for the project, and just kind of, patted ourselves on the back for doing a good job. In the second part of this blog, dubbed nicely the charting the next steps, I really tried to gather the feedback that we've gotten in the Slack from developers, from people who have been deploying wasmCloud in production. I work at Cosmonic, so I work with other enterprises that are using wasmCloud internally and for their own production. So I tried to gather that feedback, especially with talking with all of you, to outline what I feel like is working really well for wasmCloud now and what isn't working so well. And it's not to say that we haven't addressed any of these issues or haven't tried. It's just supposed to inspire some ways to do better moving forward. And really the pluggability of components, our Nats extensions, wash dev as a developer loop, language specific SDKs, all of these things have been awesome assets to the project. And when we look forward at some of the things that maybe didn't really play out exactly as we planned, I use that to feed into the issues that I've placed on the roadmap. Now, everything that's on here, we don't have to. This is a community roadmap planning, so anybody is welcome to say, "Hey, I don't think we should do that," or "Hey, maybe this needs more detail," or propose, more items. But I did just want to precede this with a couple things. So before we get into the really fun discussions, the good first issue list is actually really thin right now. So definitely I'm definitely interested in if folks want to have some good first issues that they are wanting to file or believe belong on here. We should flesh this out a little bit more over. Well, this call is great, but we can continually add to the good first issue list. These are usually smaller scoped, so they can come in really at any time. Okay, so moving left here, something that I placed in the development triage piece is the supporting in-process component to component calls. Now, this is something that we've talked about in wasmCloud for quite a while, and I think we should do it, and I will tell you why. The in the blog, I called out that when components are running in the same WebAssembly runtime and same Wasm time instance, they can call each other's functions with a couple of nanoseconds of overhead. So, if you were to compose two components together, you would see that. If you have them running in the same process, I'm sure you could achieve this about the same level of performance. And something that we actually do is always when a component wants to talk to another component, that goes out to the wRPC NATS transport. Now, this has a couple of nice properties. It means that it's a little bit more predictable. If you're running two components on two different hosts or two components on the same host, they're going to go essentially through the same transport path. But it does have some downsides in terms of, sorry, one second. It does have some downsides in terms of performance. It's not nanoseconds, but it is a couple hundred microseconds of hitting out to a NATS node to come back to the host. There is a potential of there being maybe network fallacy. It probably shouldn't. Fallibility, sorry, probably shouldn't. If the leaf node goes down, components can't communicate between each other. But really, what I would love to see from this feature, the component to component calls, is that if you make a decision when you're deploying components to put them on the same host, I think you should be able to be specific about that in a way that the components that are running on the same host can communicate with each other directly. I still think that this is a runtime platform concern over a developer concern. You shouldn't have to try and like program into your component like, oh, I'm going to be running right next to this other component, and so I'll handle that in this way. But I do think this should be an option. Now, part of this is part of this does bring up a couple of other solutions. Right now, anytime a component has a function that it imports that is not satisfied by wasmCloud, we will polyfill that to be a wRPC function call over nets. Now, that brings in a couple of other alternatives we could consider, like not having that happen. I still think that that is a superpower of Wasm Cloud, but in a different issue here on the roadmap, I'd like to discuss some of the pros and cons of that approach. But I do really like the idea that, if your components are running on the same host, they should be able to talk to each other directly. If you want to explicitly program in some distributed communication logic, like kick out to a NATS messaging layer, you can use a Wasm Cloud messaging interface to do that too. Masood, you had a comment, which I think is super fair. Feel free to come off and just say it, or I'll do it.
Yeah, Brooks. Well, as I said, this requires, let's say, more intelligence in the host, distinguishing if they're in the process or out of process to route the traffic, right?
Mhm.
So the idea is good, but I'm just saying that at least from that perspective, it contradicts the other ticket that is attempting to, kind of trim down on what host knows and what host does.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's super fair. I think that essentially for how components talk to each other, or whether it's distributed or in process, the host should basically be told exactly what it needs to do. And maybe that sounds really really abstract, but to all I really mean is that I don't think that the host should be making a game time decision, like when a function is called or when a component's run. Like, oh, well, am I running that component locally, or is that located somewhere else in the lattice? It Just like we have links today, it should be, the host should be told specifically, you're running these two components, they're going to talk to each other in process. That is the principle that I would like to approach this with. I'm sure that there are ups and downs to anything, but um, that's how I feel from the host simplification perspective. Yeah, thank you, Sue, for bringing that up. It's I love having you in the road mapping sessions. You always are really insightful with making sure that we're keeping the right goals. So I appreciate that. I'd like to just, well, please, anybody feel free to raise your hand to ask questions and things, but I really just want to go over these issues as stuff that I would like to propose and then even work on the next roadmap. So essentially is just kind of lazy consensus, and anybody's welcome to sponsor their own work too, or throw up work as a suggestion. So I think that we should, there's more design work to go into this one, like specifically how it works. But one thing that we talked about for a while is on the link itself. When you essentially tell the host where to route something, we could include a transport. Like, does this go over NATS? Does this go over, wRPC, TCP, or is this in process? That one is still in triage again because I think it needs a little more detail, but I've thrown myself on there to put more detail into it. So that one should be good. This one may be a little spicy, but but I do think it's worth talking about. In Wasm Cloud, we still use nkeys to sign our our components, our capability providers. We don't use them for routing anymore or capability claims. That was something that's somewhat a vestige of the past. We use wascap for essentially embedding a JWT in a component so that you can know who signed it, know the identity of that component, the build identity. And these seem to be a little bit at odds with a little bit at odds with the emerging standards for signing artifacts. You know, Sigstore seems to be something that people would be interested in. Um, the signing step remains to be a little confusing. You know, you run wash build in a component project, you build it, and then you sign it, and then now in the build directory, there's a component and then a signed version of the component. Um, I don't think that signing in and of itself is a bad thing to keep. It's just that over time, we've seen a lot more success in ditching things that are wasmCloud specific standards. And I really feel like we haven't been using these in real deployments to any particular gain. You don't have to have a signed component to run it in wasmCloud. That was a specific decision for 1.0 so that you could take a component off the shelf and run it. And I think that unless we still sign all of our artifacts when we publish them, but I don't know if there's any examples of using this in. I don't know if there's really any examples of using this for real for a real use case right now. So some of the things that we still have as essentially custom functionality that aren't being utilized are wascap, nkeys, and the provider archive format. All of those are essentially solved a problem um, at the time and aren't so much needed in a component based world. Um, Masood, one benefit of using keys is we already have NATs, and it provides an in key, which reduces dependency on additional signing providers. Yeah, you did a lot of the investigation into Sigstore and signing artifacts. So do you have any other thoughts on that one? I tend to agree that by having NATs, like we already have kind of an ecosystem to plug into. But the in keys that we do use are custom, a custom format.
So Lucas says that the implementation of wasmCloud is custom. It could be. The point here is that I think we kind of live in an era that signing is preferred over not signing and making it optional. And then the question is that if we consider that to be a good feature, how we want to approach it, right? And again, it goes back to the overall philosophy of this. This is a product that is not only used by, lay people like me, but also by corporations and those. And fitting a framework that is more compliant with the existing ones that are being used in the corporate world is not a bad idea.
Yeah, Masu, would you be at all interested in throwing some thoughts into this issue? Um, for
Yeah,
possible. Um,
assign it to me, and I do my research and put my put the responses there. So
okay.
then we can discuss it later on and decide on what we want to do as a community.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds awesome. I'm not just trying to arbitrarily cut out things like as much as possible, but I do feel like these kind of add confusion to the initial process and aren't particularly used when packaging an artifact. And I think with your research, you'll dig up you'll dig up the right thing. I would much rather have some kind of example for like, here's how you Sigstore package a component or, whatever. Yeah, Taylor.
Um, yeah, I'm totally fine removing this. I think the only thing we might want to check with some people on, I don't think it's being used this way, is the nice thing about nkeys was like a nice string format of a like publicly cryptographic like unique identifier for routing purposes, right? We're not leveraging that right now. We used to. I don't know if other people were trying, like people like he's not on the call right now. Like Luke feels like one of those people who might use one of those kind of features. So we just might want to double check that. But like I think in general, I'm overall in favor of it because it is just additional complexity we don't need. Um, but yeah, like that's the only thing we'd be giving up there. But I think there's other ways to do that because we're using like Spiffy and other things. So that could also be leveraged if we need to.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds great. Um, and I do like the uh, 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 essentially what Lucas called out here too, which is like we could sign things with ed 25519 keys and still keep a similar thing. Um, yeah, well, I'll go ahead and tag Luke here just so that he's aware. But make sure to follow up with him too. Yeah, this one, essentially is a continued motion towards like reusing existing standards and things that work. I think we've gotten a lot of mileage out of that in the past. So I've really tried to examine some of the things that are wasmCloud custom and see what we can essentially drop if it's not really helping us at the project level. But thank you, Masood, for signing up for adding more thoughts on here. Okay, so in the research category, which are typically more open-ended or speculative efforts, so these are some of the big things. I think we have some fun things to talk about. Most of these came from essentially straight from the blog post, like what could be better. And I think it's time that we try and find good solutions for these pain points in wasmCloud. So, I tried. Thank you, Bailey, for helping me file some of these issues. Tried to not be overly prescriptive on the solution here, because there's plenty of room for some design, but we definitely have room for improvement as well. So, feature support configuring a wasmCloud host with shared capability providers. This actually came up in the wasmCloud Slack just this past week, where folks who deploy using wasmCloud, most likely they are deploying using Wasm, which is our application deployment manager, it's our orchestrator, scheduler, whatever fun word you want to use. And what this does, come on, sure. What this does is it bundles all of the capabilities and components that you need to run into something called an application. Now, this is a manifest format that we took from OAM, which is used, Open Application Model, which is used by Cube, Vela, and maybe a couple other projects. And we picked it because it wasn't container specific, but it was YAML, and you could lay out all the things that you need to deploy an application declaratively. Say, for this HTTP middleware application, I need an HTTP client and server capability provider, and I have my component, and here's all the config, go deploy it. Now, that in and of itself is not, I think, a bad idea. It makes a lot of sense and is really great for when you have a couple of like isolated applications that you're running in wasmCloud. Now, I drew this up as a little bit of an example because, on one wasmCloud host, you may have multiple different applications with different domains, and but the commonality between them is that they all use similar capability providers. They need to have something that implements WASI key value, for a key value store. And when you deploy it, you picked Redis. But with the application boundary, you have two choices. You can either deploy an instance of that provider entirely for your one application, or, and this is introduced after wasmCloud 1.0 released as a way to essentially compensate for this. You can run a capability provider in a shared provider mode. And when you do that, you essentially run it as an application and you say, hey, this provider is available for anybody to use. So you can link from one application to another. And that does address the underlying concern. But what we really want here is a set of capability providers that are configured and can be reused by multiple different components. Something that can provide a capability to a component. But if I have three different components that use HTTP, I want each of these components to either have a port or a path or a host name that's assigned to them, not an entire HTTP server. So by removing the forced boundary of the application around capabilities specifically, or anything that's reused, I think that it would result in a little bit more of an efficient deployment for Wasm Cloud resources. Here I just took the same one, but each line would be a provider basically in the old model, and now we have fewer. I intentionally picked a more complex one just to show many providers. So with that being said, this is a pattern that I feel like we've seen many people deploy with, where you have like a couple of shared capabilities or shared components, and then you have many different components that are actually making up your application or business domain. Now, I don't have a strict, where was I? I don't have a strict prescription for how I would want this to occur, because I don't have a strong opinion. This could be something that changes in Wadham. It could change as a part of the configuration of the host, like when you start it up, or maybe something else. So this one's really in a brainstorm. But I would really love for that shared provider mechanism to be something that we can use to configure the Wasm Cloud platform. Meaning you have your set of hosts that are deployed, and then you expose some capability providers that can be used or linked to by whatever component, and that is you configuring your platform. I hope that kind of lays out the problem statement. I don't know if folks have any questions there, but this is something that I feel like we see pretty commonly. It's not often that you have very many capability providers like these native binaries or implementations that are one-off, like you want to deploy one of them only for one service, though that is a totally valid option. I just like to have better support for making those like multi-tenant providers accessible by a ton of things. Masood, you had a question. Where are we going to capture the link configuration when the capability provider is the source?
So Brooks, you know that today, let's say HTTP provider, in its configuration, we say that it's going to send whatever it receives to this destination, which is a component that wants to reuse it, right? So when we kind of separate these things from each other and we make them shared, and now they're not in, let's say, expressed on the same manifest, the question becomes that where are we going to capture that? Does it mean that the application manifest for WADM needs to now be updated in order to, let's say, move that to the component side, to make it a consumer rather than, a target? in a sense.
Yeah. Um, this the relationship of config to providers is complicated. Um, Especially when you think of like I have a component that wants to listen on a specific path, for or just a port to keep it easy. That is it is a configuration property of like the component is saying like please expose my port here. But the provider needs to know. Like the provider is the one who opens up the resource. So right now, the way that we do it in Wadham is when you reference a shared provider where the provider is the source, we still create a link from that provider to the component. And the configuration that you supply in the app manifest that's using that provider is what gets sent to the provider itself. So I'm just waving my hands as I try to say this, but um, we capture the link configuration on the essentially on the like guest manifest side, but we still send it to the shared provider for, opening up that port or what have you. I think maybe we could do that in a way that's a little cleaner. Um, but the often I feel like the capability provider has a set of information that it needs to know to like accomplish its goal, but really config is more centered around the component that's being called in such a way or calling something else. And there's room for improvement there. Um, but that's my thoughts. Does that help address, what you're thinking? I think there's still some.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with the mechanism there.
Yeah.
I was just commenting that this change, uh, I think this change would still require changes to WADM. We cannot escape that.
Yeah, I think if you are, I think, you know, orchestrating with Wadham, we would have to change. It would mean, yeah, we would have to change something. The component may, or Wadham may have like a list of providers that's been configured or something like that. Um, yeah, Taylor.
Yeah, I just want to call. I think the part that I don't know, like you said, this is brainstorming. I think the ideal future is where the platform is configured with the things beforehand. Like whether the like we've had multiple talks, and I think it doesn't matter what kind of provider it is, whether it's just like a binary provider like we have now, where it's running locally, whether it's like a, Wasm one that's in there, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But I think that'll make it clear because I do know Brooks and I have had many debug sessions with this where we sit there and curse ourselves about like source, target, source, target, torse. I don't, and so like so I really don't love that terminology. Brooks and I were like, this was a mistake whenever we talk about it. So, um, I think the ideal is going back and just leaning on the imports and exports as defined by like WIT. And hopefully we can maybe provide some feedback on how that's done back to the wider community. But I'm curious, like, if we can take like steps along the way, because no matter what we do, like things like WDAM and stuff will evolve. Like Brooks talked about this a while ago too. Like we've had lots of brainstorms around using like the host being with the host being simpler, right? Like we can delegate a lot more rather than the host handling so much. Like the orchestration piece can be any number of things. It can be Kubernetes. It could be the next version of WDAM as well. It could have support multiple things, and then those things like send the configuration. But it might be nice to essentially do, since a lot of people here are at least familiar with Kubernetes, essentially label targeting of capabilities, right? Like this thing has these capabilities, target it to that, and then so I think that's the middle ground is where I don't know if we can just make the jump or if we need like a middle ground step where we can do something a little bit easier because the source target, which thing has the config will just be, I think it's just confusing. And if we can fix that, th that'd be great.
So Taylor, that definitely, again, I'm fully supportive of any simplification because that also make maintenance much easier. But in cases of, let's say, components such as HTTP or even messaging, they need to, like, provider needs to get some insights into where it's sending the incoming traffic, right? And so we still need some way of expressing and saying that you're sending it to this port or you're sending it to that topic and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I'm not saying that'll go away. I'm saying I'm hopefully that we can make it easier because then it's just like a platform capability level, which is the whole idea. Yeah, like Brooks is writing it up. Like, what's the way we do the configuration in a way that's not as difficult to understand as we currently have it?
Yeah. Yeah. I snagged this one. I just assigned this one to myself. I don't have to do it, but um I
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I'd love to take some of I think that these questions are all super important. I tried to capture the key challenge. I'd love to maybe give some options or like propose something a little bit more concrete here too. Because I think generally this feeds into the future of providers, links, and config. They're all very tightly integrated.
Yeah, I was just about to say that ideally, again, providers have no purpose other than serving the needs of components. And that means that ideally providers should be, let's say, without any configuration or with bare minimum configuration that they just need from being able to, hook into the ecosystem and the environment, and the rest of the responsibility in terms of guiding them that, hey, I'm here, send it to me, or I'm sending to you, should be delegated to the component side.
Yeah, I like that idea. Um, I like that idea. Speaking of providers, got more fun things to talk about there too. Um, so don't let me railroad over like conversation. If anybody has thoughts, questions, okay, yeah, Taylor, maybe you and I can brainstorm or something. Just stop me, just raise your hand, ask a question. We always run late on the road mapping session, so if anybody's got to go at the top of the hour and wants to throw something in, please let me know. But we always go late on this one. So capability providers. Do we love them, we hate them, can't live with them, can't live without them. I would love to transition the capability provider model. Um, uh, I'm sorry, Masood. But before I get started on this one, is there anything that you wanted to bring up for the roadmap that maybe not isn't captured, just so that make sure you get your feedback before
No,
you get.
thanks for the opportunity. I think I talked too much already. I leave my comments in the tickets because I have a few comments about the rest of the items. So I leave them in the ticket.
Okay. Yeah, that would be wonderful. Thank you. And if there's anything else, I think you have permissions as a maintainer to do this. Please feel free to throw it on the roadmap. If there's something like work you want to sponsor or whatever. If you put any issue on the wasmCloud roadmap project and then mark it for quarter 3, it'll go on there.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so capability providers. We came up with, by we, it's like people have been working on wasmCloud, came up with capability providers a long time ago because WebAssembly did not have a standard interface for doing networking. For wasmCloud at the time did not wasmCloud at the time did not use WASI actually, so we didn't even have like file system stuff. So capability providers are for providing a capability to a component, and we've carried that forward for quite a long time. We distribute them using OCI. You build native binaries for each architecture and operating system that you want to support. Very annoying. And then you package it into a tarball, you put it in OCI. We've had some proposals to make that a little better, like, putting up the binaries as separate layers and things like that. But more separately, if we think about what a capability provider is, it's a binary that the host launches on, executes on the same machine. It receives this bundle of configuration right when it starts over standard in, which is like, hey, here's how you connect to nets, and here's the level of logging you should do. And like, I'm going to send a bunch of links to you, and I hope you're listening here. And so that is basically what a provider is, in addition to serving a set of exports or maybe supporting imports using wRPC. Now, I think that all of this stuff actually detracts from, uh, yes, for sure. I think this actually detracts from the purpose that a capability provider serves. As Masood just said, like it is meant to provide, like to give a capability on behalf of a component. And I would love for us to really focus on these providers as a wRPC server. Name pending, it's not my strong suit, but really what a wRPC server could be is any program binary container component that serves and implements a WIT interface over a transport that's available with wRPC. So TCP, NATS, Quick, UDP, wRPC supports all of those. And yeah, as Taylor mentioned, we've called this external providers in the past when we've done brainstorming about like, how do we make a provider run in a container so that you could, if you're already running in Kubernetes, you could like control its resources independently. Um, in combination with the configuring a set of platform providers, I would love to see us lean more into this model of uh, the host is essentially told, here's where you can talk to a provider. And all that provider is responsible for is serving an interface over the transport that it's told. I know that there's a ton more to talk about there, but I was really inspired by Luke, who's wasmCloud maintainer, Luke's proposal for virtual components here. And really all a virtual component is something that's listening on wRPC and can be addressed well over wRPC. So his implementation here is just like if you know where you can call this component provider, you can do it. And what I think is so nice about this proposal is one, the host can stop dealing with executing binaries, like dealing with their process lifetime, dealing with the intricacies of doing it on Linux, Mac, Windows. We can kind of throw away a lot of our a lot of our difficult aspects of you tell the provider like to start and then we don't really know if it started or not. When you restart the host, you don't have to restart all of the providers again. They're kind of sitting there waiting. um, and I would love for the host not to execute binaries or containers. It just executes components, and that is in the vein of host simplification. So I think that there's still some impact that we need to determine the impact that something like this would have. And I think in the local development story, we can lean a lot more into built-in providers, as in like in the same process. We can lean a lot more into simple components that implement the provider functionality, like implementing the blob store provider using using like a file system, or just something in process. And when you actually go to run in a production environment, you can orchestrate these providers using Kubernetes, using Nomad. I'm going to need to pull up with Luke at some point because I know that he runs a really large wasmCloud instance set of applications in production and does it all with nix basically. So no containers there. But I think that if we could think of our providers more as these like WIT serving servers, then it really simplifies what the host has to do, and would really help us get rid of one of the more frictionful pieces of what we have now. Now, this isn't saying that all capability providers won't work anymore. I think that's kind of the beauty of it, is that it just makes the job of the provider simpler, right? Provider is already a wRPC server. So I'd love to do a little more spiking on this and figure out how to make this happen. Um, yeah. Um, Masood had one last comment before he had to head out, that this change is probably going to make workload identity necessary. Um, I think that without getting all the way there, I don't know if it'll have to be there, but certainly if wasmCloud's talking to some arbitrary external service, workload identity would make that a lot more secure. So this one goes kind of hand in hand with the configuring platform. And I think that generally it's just around the same area that like we need a better way to do this. Um, I guess we still have some other things to talk about. Do folks have any thoughts, questions, ideas on this one as proposed? Um,
Right, it looks good, Brooks. I think we just need to make sure when we do it, figure out like, do things need to register themselves with a server? Are they globally available for a given like wasmCloud lattice? Are they, like there's some things where when we talked about this before, like I'd kind of brainstormed a basic like registration mechanism for
mhm.
it. That there's multiple ways that this could be handled, but we should probably have something so that they're known to be available and around. Um, or maybe not. Maybe we don't need it, but just something to think about.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I hope everybody took me seriously when I said that I'm trying to call out, things that we could do better, but not being super prescriptive, because I think, and so thanks for asking questions. Um, and I think for what it's worth, the majority of these changes we can probably roll forward into, essentially have whether it's a new control interface operation or a new mode of operation in the host, things like that. Um, yeah, just to try it out. Okay. Actually, since I'm already working on the other one, I might steal this one too. Basically, I'm just gonna steal every item on the roadmap. No. I'm gonna snag this one too, but don't let this stop anybody from leaving feedback. I think I'd just like to try and compile more thoughts and any questions that come up into a proposal. These are just, I think, RFCs that bring these out of triage, and then we make it happen. Okay. Next one is on simplifying interface maintenance. So there we've spent quite a lot of time in maintaining interfaces on wasmCloud. So we inside of the wasmCloud runtime, we build in bindings and support for WASI logging, WASI key value, WASI blob store, WASI messaging 0.2 and 0.3, and WASI config runtime and WASI runtime config. And this definitely makes it complicated to maintain these interfaces. And it's not really anybody's fault. We wanted to give people functionality using the latest and greatest available, even if in draft standard. Like when in wasmCloud, we want people to be using WASI Blob Store for interacting with a blob store, WASI key value, as long as those interfaces are what are being proposed through various levels in the WASI cloud space. Like that's what we should be using. There's feels silly to have our own like separate abstraction. Um, and integrating into the host means that if something changes upstream, we have to maintain both versions. And we knew that, and that's okay. And we're actually able to do that. But it definitely takes time, and it definitely is hard when we have many capability provider implementations built on these. Um, giving you an example, the WASI key value interface has gone through like draft changes. We support a different version of that interface to go over wRPC. Now I don't think we would need that, but it's different. And we have implementations for Redis, Nats, Vault, maybe something else in the providers. So there is a lot that has to change if there is a change in an upstream interface. So I think moving forward, we should learn from this mistake. We shouldn't build in more interfaces that are in draft because they're likely to change, and we shouldn't put that responsibility on any particular interface to like never change once it starts in a draft mode. I think Bailey called out the right set of interfaces to build in here. We should have the essentially WASI 0.2. Those interfaces are like, committed. We'll do the same thing in WASI 0.3. But those things are, very resistant to change. And if there is a breaking change, new functionality, then, we have adapters and ways to move forward, guaranteed. And then we can also build in things that are wasmCloud lifecycle. So like wasmCloud component here, like wasmCloud lattice bus, like those are the things that we control the interface, the versioning, the backwards compatibility. And so I think those are totally fine. In general, though, I like there's no reason why we can't lean into our custom interface support. wasmCloud Postgres is an example of this. Like you can use the Postgres provider and you wouldn't have any idea that it wasn't like built into the host because there's no difference. So I think we should really lean into that as much as we can. It means that the burden of compatibility goes on the wRPC server side essentially. But that's something that's a lot easier to control than releasing a wasmCloud version that supports WASI logging without a version and WASI logging with 0.10 draft in it. I'm not sure if folks have other thoughts here, but really this is just in the name of reducing our maintainer responsibility on having all these interfaces, all these implementations of interfaces and keeping them up to date all the time. Because if we had fewer things to do there, we could do a better job at maintaining the ones that we do have. So maybe I don't.
Brooks, the only thing I'd say there is WASI config feels like one we shouldn't rip out. I don't care if we have to replace it with like our own wasmCloud config again, but we should definitely have a config thing around for components still. The other ones I'm all game with ripping out because that was a pain to manage, and those are go not embedded in there, but as like you said on the wRPC server side. But WASI config feels like one we should probably keep around.
It sounds reasonable. Yeah, just because we socialize it around. I would love to think of ways that we can make these plugins too. Like, you can provide your own implementation of WASI config. Maybe that, fetches something from somewhere. But yeah, the intent is definitely not to take away these capabilities. It's just to decouple them from the host lifecycle. But I think config as a call out as being a little different makes sense. It's such bad notes, but I'll remember it when we look at it. So at least we have that. Um, this one's a little stickier, so maybe we can talk about this one instead. Reducing host responsibility and API service. We've talked about this one before. It came up when we were talking about Nats earlier in the year. But really a host now is responsible for a heck of a lot. Managing processes on the local operating system, reconciling its own state with a global Nats Jetstream bucket, writing state to that global Nats Jetstream bucket to make sure that it's socialized among other hosts. I would really love to simplify some of these things. We've already started on some of this process in the wasmCloud host, but really what I would like the host to do is to start to have some set of configuration, maybe the providers that it should run or like the OTel endpoint to connect to, and then it should basically sit there and wait for a scheduler and orchestrator to tell it what to do. I have a little bit of a diagram that I hope will help inspire what this may look like. And this is the same one basically that I brought up when we were talking about the tight coupling of wasmCloud to Nats, which is like when the host starts, you have to connect to a Nats Jetstream bucket to get data and configuration and subscribe for control interface operations and make requests to get secrets and make sure that it's okay with the policy engine and publish events and all that stuff. And it's all there for a reason. I'm trying to say anything in this is bad. But what we have now are these really light abstractions, which, this is all like in Rust code or whatever. But instead of saying, hey, give me the config from Nats, now the host uses an abstraction and says, hey, give me this piece of config. And there is a implementation of that fetches config from Nats. Or, hey, here's an event that happened in the system, like publish that and you can hook into that however you'd like. Now, the theme of this is, or wait, no, the theme of this is basically moving in the direction of the host being less tightly coupled to these specific implementations and being more embeddable inside of a different system that wants to dictate how the host gets this information. So to hopefully tie this together in a more specific strawman. Again, this is just a proposal, but when I think of what would be a great level of responsibility for the host to have, we can have the wasmCloud host library essentially as it is today, and that is embedded inside of the wasmCloud binary, like the thing that you run. This is what you have now. And all the host is responsible for is basic configuration, things like what's your log level? Where should I write standard error logs to? Where should I emit traces, logging metrics? Maybe these don't even have to be at this layer, but I think it makes sense. I think it should wrap our runtime. The runtime is what executes, it's WASM time, but our opinionated version of it to execute components. And then it should support a wRPC server API, some API to talk to, capability providers and send messages over wRPC. And then really what I think would make this a lot simpler is if the host controls interface API, I've called this the control API here, is basically along the level of granularity of like, run this component. Here's all the information you need to run this component, all of its config, all of its links, all of its secrets, the component bytes. You know, if the host is only responsible for taking that specification of a component and then executing it, then it doesn't need to be responsible for reaching out to a secret store or, you know, sourcing where configuration comes from, or executing a provider. It just needs it. Basically, the whole theme of this is some supervisor scheduler like Wadom, like Kubernetes, tells the wasmCloud host, run this. And then the host could say, like, no, or I couldn't, but that's it. It doesn't need to do what it does now, where Wadom takes this whole application manifest and breaks it into individual commands and sends them out to all hosts everywhere. Same thing. I just spitballed wRPC server connect, right? You know, it definitely doesn't have to be that. But a really cool way that we could support this is essentially having it. This is down at like the Rust trait level. So, you know, take everything with a kind of a grain of salt here. But like when the host starts, it could register with this scheduler, this control plane. And all that really does is basically send a host heartbeat out to say like, hey, I'm alive. Can somebody help me do a thing? And this may be wash locally, like wash would see that the host started and it can call functions directly on the host to like, oh, okay, here's your component, you know, go start the thing. This could be a gRPC server that's connected to Kubernetes, and you know, Kubernetes could be like, hey, go start this component. Um, it could be like a direct subscription to a Nats Jetstream bucket that's like constantly watching for component specs to get inserted. So sorry for going a little Charlie Day and like pointing my hands around. But I would really love for us to have a essentially default mode for this supervisor. It may be that like Nats bucket mode. It may be like loading from a local file. But I think if we can separate a lot of these concerns to this, you know, supervisor layer, it takes a lot of the things that the host is responsible for, and pushes it somewhere else. But pushing it somewhere else means that the core is really small. It's embeddable. We can put it in wash. We could have Wadom-based scheduling, things like that. So I can share this Excalibur in terms of ideas, but really the hope for this is that by outlining the different responsibilities of what goes into wasmCloud's architecture, we actually get a more flexible system because the host core itself is just responsible for so little. Um, does that make me sound crazy? Or does this sound like a decent like a straw man for moving forward with this with the Wasm Cloud host, you know, reducing responsibility? All right, I'll take that as it made me sound a little crazy. Oh, nice. I got a thumbs up. Yay. You know, I figured that like making things simpler isn't going to be controversial to anybody. Um, but you know, I really think that we uh I don't know where I was going. Lucas, you said I think it sounds good. Much of that behavior is like pre-Wadom.
Yeah, pretty much the fact that the host is doing a lot, it comes from the fact that it was possible to stand up a host and interact with that host directly. But at the moment that we always have a scheduler present in the setup, then the scheduler can take a bit more responsibility.
Yeah, okay. That totally makes sense. Yeah, I think that we'll need to have like the most simple version of this for like an edge deployment or something where you could just throw a configuration file at a host and say, here's all the stuff you have to run, no runtime scheduler. But by leaning into this model, for sure, it makes the host responsibility a lot simpler. Alrighty. Nothing. I'll link that Excalibur draw. Nothing set in stone there, of course, but just simplify host would be super nice. We talked about this a little while for like the control interface v2 endpoint. So, I really think that we can start working towards some of this stuff sooner rather than later. Okay, I think there's only one more that I wanted to talk about. And this one is interesting. So I'm really curious what people think. I dubbed this intentional distributed networking and related to the ability for components to invoke each other within process. Um, one of the magical aspects of wasmCloud right now is that we have seamless distributed networking. So if you run two components on one host or two components on two hosts, then they're going to talk to each other the exact same. And that's because every single component to component call happens over wRPC, and we use NATs as that transport. Now, we do that for things like WASI key value, WASI HTTP, WASI blob store, like things that you maybe wouldn't expect to be a distributed call, but we make it work because we have this wRPC model. And that is really cool. And it's a little scary. It's a little scary when you get to configuring this kind of system in production, and you don't really know all the things. I guess you can suss it out, but it's hard to know when all of your calls are going to be going over a transport. If you use the pluggable nature of wRPC to change from the NATS transport to a TCP transport, now your routing semantics change. Like you connect to a TCP port, and that may not be the same. It may not have the same properties that NATS does, like with queues, subscriptions, and routing. And what I'd really like to have is, leaning in on the ability for components to call each other if they're running on the same host makes this a lot easier. But when you do make a distributed call, I think you should have the ability to handle errors that happen at that level of transport. And I think you should specifically need to opt into doing that component to component call over a distributed network. Now, one of the things that you see today in wasmCloud is if you try to call a WASI key value endpoint, like, increment this value at this key, and there is no provider running on the other side, your component will panic. Like it will panic. You cannot recover from it. And that is because the component is expecting for there to be an implementation in the host that can call, increment a value, and there is not. So we don't the interface doesn't have a result that we can act on. It just gives you back like, a number. So we made something to compensate for this, and that's wRPC errors. Now, if you take any custom interface at all, and you make the return type a result with your desired return type and wRPC error as the error type, you can actually handle these transport level failures in your component. So no panic. If there's a problem with calling this function at runtime, we will give you back that error and you could act on it. So, maybe NATS wasn't connected, or you didn't have the proper link configured, anything like that. Now, this is awesome for custom interfaces, but it doesn't it also is compatible with composition, which is really cool. You can compose these things together, but it's not compatible with like WASI key value. They're not going to build in wRPC error into that interface. So I would love to have, essentially a a mode for wasmCloud where you can opt out of the distributed networking. You can ensure that everything is kept locally on the one, on the one node if you want two components to talk to each other. And if you're doing a distributed call, you essentially have two options. You can use an interface with wRPC error so that you can handle the network failures there, and you can kind of explicitly opt into using wRPC. Or you could use an interface like wasmCloud messaging. So if you're interested in the NATS semantics of going from one component to the next, you can use wasmCloud messaging, or maybe like a NATS messaging API. Um, I don't know if any of these alternatives are like covering for every scenario, but really I want to preserve the ability for wasmCloud to do its awesome distributed networking piece, but I want it to be intentional. And I don't want to try and force like the NATS transport mechanics on folks, because often when they come into wasmCloud and they're like, well, how does my one component talk to each other? Then we say, well, wRPC and NATS. And it's like, well, how does the routing work there? It's like, well, go learn NATS and then come back. So I'm really interested in what folks' thoughts are on this. The real goal is just to make deployments a little bit more predictable. Help you have the ability as as a platform engineer who's running components, who's deciding to place them in particular on particular hosts, that you have a little bit more control over how the distributed communication works. Um, uh, Taylor, sorry to just call you out directly, and just let me know if you can't chat. I don't know if we've talked about this one before, but obviously you've been a big proponent of NATS for a while. Any initial thoughts on this one?
Oh, I'm all on board with making this. I honestly think the my answer to your one of a few things happen is por qué no los tres instead of the two, because like I think we can do all of them. I've also kind of toyed with the idea when I've been thinking about this of maybe having like the equivalent of like a Rust marker trait, but for wit, where you could return whether or not you allow for so it would just be like a single interface with a single export that's like distributed bool, and you return whether or not like you allow a distributed call or not. That was one of the ideas I had, so you could explicitly opt in by implementing the interface for something. And so then we could see, okay, is this distributed? But I also think like number one on your list, like if it's local, do not distribute it. Like just don't. Like there's no purpose to if you have something that can do it. Um, and then the distributed networking, I think it'd be really cool to do an inference type step as well. And we could probably have like like just basically a layered approach to this. So we have like the first thing is if you have the marker trait, that overrides everything. If you say this is distributed, this will be distributed. The one thing is I don't know how that would interact with if there is a local thing, but this is a thought exercise. And then after that, it would say like only if it's not running locally, and then only if like the target interface has wRPC error. Um, Number three, if we can find a way to mark that through introspection, I'd love to do that too. But that might just be taken over by like the is this a distributed interface type of thing. Um, I'm all on board with it because I like having it by default. My concerns with it have always been like getting rid of that and not making it a sane default for people, because at least in the community conversations we've had over the past 5 years, that's one of the killer features that a lot of people come to wasmCloud for. So what I wanted to do was make it so like, okay, you want to run this like purely like in a local like TCP connections to everything, perfectly fine. Do that. You don't need NATs. Enable that possibility. And that's like what all these other things are doing. And then also, do you want to run it distributed, or do you want to run this, like locally on an edge device? And it might only specific things might need to go distributed at specific times. So I'm all on board with this. I do think like I said, the other suggestion is the equivalent of the Rust marker trait, or something that like a component can express or something can express that it is distributed. It's supposed to be run distributed.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks for letting me single you out. But um yeah. All right. Well, that was actually the last one. I know that there aren't a ton of items on this roadmap, but the items themselves are pretty big. Some, big changes in behavior, some new things, some simplification. So I think there's folks who are on the call and listening. Please go take a look at the roadmap and leave your thoughts, feedback, questions, concerns. Would love to hear from you if you have, essentially a deployment and you think that one of these things would help it or not. So I think that's really the call to action here. But we've gone way over. So call to action, everybody. If you've got thoughts on some of the issues and you didn't get to talk about it today, then please go leave comments on those issues. Two, if you're a maintainer or a member of the community and you want, something to be done in Q3, especially if you are willing to do that work, please reach out to any of the maintainers. You're welcome to reach out to me as well, and we can get that put on the roadmap too. Same with Good First Issues. That's an awesome place to like help solicit feedback and or help solicit people who are wanting to contribute for the first time. Thank you all for chatting and contributing and letting me yap at you for the last like 90 minutes. I really appreciate it. I think that this will be a pretty exciting quarter for wasmCloud. It's the best wasmCloud yet. We think you're gonna love it. All right, folks. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Alex, if it still works okay for you, happy to chat. Um, but
Yeah, absolutely. If you want, I don't know if you want to end the recording like once everyone meets and after you guys wrap up the meeting, then I can kind of explain it here. And
yeah,
then I can either give you another Zoom link, because I'll record the meeting, so like I can give you another Zoom link, but we can, kind of go through it here, and that way, once we start the Zoom, then we can just get into the interview.
okay. Yeah, that sounds great. Well, I guess we'll wrap up here. Thank you, everybody. Have a Wasm Cloud day, and we'll see you next week for our regularly scheduled call. Have a good one.